Welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast, where we break down the complex and emotional process of divorce into manageable, easy-to-understand steps. I'm your host, Greer Howard, and with me is Bobby Buchanan, widely recognized as one of Illinois' top divorce attorneys, offering unmatched insight and experience in family law. Well, we are excited to be back for another episode, and Bobby, I know that today we are talking about kind of 3 stages of sprints that you do right when you find out you're getting divorced, but today you were sprinting because you were working out with your wife, and we kind of started a little bit later. So you were sprinting to get into your seat today to be able to talk to us. But I love that you're working out with your wife. So tell me like how this came about and why you decided, you're like, I'm making this a priority.
I am. Greer, great to see you. Great to be back for another episode. And yeah, I did. Listeners, I should confess that I texted Greer about 5 minutes before we were supposed to shoot and said, oh my God, I've forgotten that we switched our time around. And the reason I switched it was because I wanted to make sure that I was open to go work out with my wife. We're trying to do it like 3 times a week, but 10 a.m. every day, that chunk of the day we take for ourselves and we go do kind of a group workout. Usually it's just the two of us, and it's been super nice. It's like a circuit training, like weight training, circuit training.
Mhm.
I was not into lifting weights or never really lifted weights until about 2 years ago. And I just felt, as we get older, I think I probably was right around that magical number of 40 and going, oh my God, I'm like kind of getting to the other side of the hill. I want to do something for my body, make sure that, it's just not, I don't know what a nice way of saying it is, but just not getting weaker as we get older.
Yeah,
So
the dad bod. You're trying to get away from the dad bod.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I I started weight training and I really enjoyed it and felt like it was a game changer for me. And I think my wife saw me doing it, and it took her about a year until the opportunity arose where she went to check it out, and then she started doing it and she really fell in love with it as well. So it's become part of our both of our routines and something we love, and now that we can do it together, it's just really cool. It's another way for us to connect and build a strong relationship. Obviously, this is a divorce podcast. Well, the other side of that is kind of the healthy marriage. How to build a healthy marriage. I think everybody that's listening to this, ultimately, that's you don't get married thinking you're going to get divorced, and everyone listening to this is someone who wants to have that partnership. And just because this one didn't work out for you doesn't mean that another one can't. And I don't honestly, I'm one of those people, without my wife, I am somewhat of a mess. Like, I live for her, I live for my kids, like I stay focused. I need that external thing, that external why, to kind of keep me motivated and keep me going. And boy, oh boy, have I found it. I feel so fulfilled with my family, and this kind of addition has been so nice for my wife and I to do. So that's why I'm late. The listeners have no idea.
What a great excuse. Yeah. They don't know. What a great excuse, Bobby. I mean, here you are as a divorce attorney, and you're not looking at divorce thinking, ooh, it's easy and I can't wait to get out. You're actually actively trying to make sure that your marriage is healthy and recognize your wife and how important she is in your life. And I just think it's so awesome. So very cool. You be late anytime to go work out with your wife.
I appreciate it. So with that said, let's do this. Let's dive in and talk about what people are here to listen to.
So in our last podcast, we talked about sort of the first 30 days after, that you're getting divorced. And so we're now talking about kind of that next step, which is going to be day like 31 through 60, Bobby. So that's kind of what we're focusing on today. So you're still new, the divorce process is still relatively new. And the things we're going to be talking about are the appearance, affidavits, and potentially temporary motions if they're needed. So, why don't we just start out with when the other side files for an appearance? And maybe you should just kind of clarify for anybody out there, what exactly that is and what that means.
Yeah, so the appearance is it's a legal document. It's not like a physical appearance in court where they're showing up, but the appearance is literally a one-page sheet that says appearance on the top, and it says I am appearing on behalf of myself, or maybe it's your lawyer filling it out saying I am appearing on behalf of my client, and they file that with the court. And the last episode we talked about getting your spouse served, and that's getting your spouse served is like step one of really getting the case started. Step two is when your spouse actually files this appearance, because what that appearance says to the court is I'm here and I am participating in this process. So it's really game on. Once that appearance gets filed, you can start filing motions. The clock starts ticking as far as financial affidavits. Your spouse will be filing what's called an answer as well. An answer is where they address your original petition, and we don't need to get into the legal nuances or the kind of the nuts and bolts of it. I think for our purposes as listeners thinking about the divorce process, just know that there's some foundational paperwork that's filed at the beginning of this case, and then we can launch into really the substance of what this case is all about.
Okay. All right. So we filed the appearance. We're going, hi, I'm here. I'm participating. And at this point, we talk a little bit about financial affidavits. So, kind of explain like what that is, what goes into that, and why that's important.
Yeah, in every divorce, there's going to be a full financial disclosure of what's going on. And this is a big piece, and a lot of people don't quite understand how transparent the divorce process is and should be. But this is really where we put our financial cards on the table. I do not recommend skipping over this part. There are divorces that can be done where you and your spouse agree on everything and you don't exchange the full financial affidavit. But in my experience, there is a lot that can go wrong if you do it that way. Some judges won't even accept your final divorce documents if you skip over the financial affidavit. For all intents and purposes, this is mandatory. And what it is a 10 or 11 page document. It's the same form for everybody, where we lay out your current income, last year's income, an itemization of your income, where's the money coming from, an itemization of all your expenses, where's the money going, and then your assets, your debts. That's really the nuts and bolts of it. Those four things that give us a true picture of what is the marital estate in this case.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can be somewhat common that one of the spouses is kind of like puts their head in the sand about certain topics in a marriage. And, this is one of those areas where you just can't. Like, you can't put your head in the sand. You've got to figure out the information so that it's all out there. And, it really is just such an important part of the process. And what would you say kind of during this time period, once okay, we're both participating, we're working on this financial affidavit, what would be the goals of for your client during this time of like kind of that 30 to 60 day mark after, that the appearance, has happened?
Yeah, I think the number one goal is really getting this financial affidavit done in a timely manner. One of the biggest missteps that can happen here is people procrastinating on the financial affidavit, not getting back to us, our own clients not getting back to us with the documentation that we need, with the information that we need. And it's completely understandable. Like, I get it. If you're in the middle of this process right now and you're being slow on getting this stuff to your lawyer, because probably, going through this financial information may be emotionally triggering. It may be stuff that sometimes when we're not in the best financial position, we don't like to dive into our own finances. It's like, a lot of us live financially from a 50,000 foot view and just, as long as things are going okay, we don't dive into the weeds. And this is something where we really have to dive into the weeds and look at what's going on. I mean, there are huge wake up calls that happen during the financial affidavit process. And there's some really tough cases where people discover maybe that tax returns haven't been actually been filed for the last few years. They thought they were filed. They were, signing them for their spouse, but their spouse was never actually filing them. Or they find out that there is a huge amount of credit card debt that they didn't know about, or a number of credit cards that were taken out or open that they didn't know about. So the financial affidavit process can be quite emotional and overwhelming. So I definitely feel for my clients that drag their feet on this a little bit, but it's so crucial that we keep on pushing, we keep on walking through that mud to get it done, because we don't want to end up behind the 8 ball because we're already missing deadlines in the very beginnings of this case.
Yeah. What do you do if there's a client where you feel like they think their spouse is not being honest? Like they don't feel like they're putting all of their financial information into this affidavit? Because I imagine that can happen from time to time that people aren't transparent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not as rare as we would want it to be, especially, the divorce process inherently involves people that, the bonds of trust have been broken. And so they don't take each other's word for things as much as people in a healthy marriage. So when we do get a financial affidavit from the other side that doesn't add up, where our client suspects that there's missing bank accounts or that the numbers aren't accurate, that's when we need to have a talk with our client about, do you want to move into the discovery process? And this is something that we will go into more in depth in the next segment. But just to kind of give you a preview, what discovery is, it's a comprehensive request for pretty much all financial documentation in the last couple of years. All bank statements, all credit card statements. You can request a credit report. A credit report could give you a ton of information about what credit cards have been opened, what other debts have been accrued from the other side. You can ask for a tax transcript to see exactly what has been filed, what has not been filed. So that discovery process is quite lengthy. It can be expensive. So we have to have that talk with our client about, is this going to be worth it for you? Is there enough that's omitted? Like just your spouse omitting something small doesn't necessarily make sense to dive into the discovery process. It really has to be worth it. It has to be expensive, and your spouse is going to retaliate, almost guaranteed. Their lawyer is going to respond in kind and say, okay, you're going to issue full discovery to us. We're going to issue full discovery to you. And not only is it expensive, but it's incredibly tedious. I mean, you now have given yourself this homework project of having to put together all this documentation and then getting it over to your law firm, and then they have to compile it in a special way. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of time. It does cost a lot of money, and it's necessary in some cases, but really, if we can avoid it, we'll avoid it.
Okay. So let's say in this particular case, we've been able to avoid it, which is great. But there's still some prep to do. There's still actually some work. So can you talk through like what type of things are maybe on, that affidavit, or what you should be prepping for, what information you'd need to gather?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to have to turn over pay stubs with this. We're going to have to turn over bank statements with this, and tax returns. So those are the three major documents that you want to start getting together as you start this process. Depends on what type of pay stub you have, whether or not the last two pay stubs are going to be enough, or you're going to need year-to-date pay stubs. You'll want to have a W-2 from the previous year, your last 2 years of tax returns. Usually, it's customary to exchange the last 6 months of bank statements as well. There's some mandatory documentation that is required with the financial affidavit, and then there's some customary stuff. And what I mean by customary is generally lawyers who've been doing this long enough, they have a list of documents that they'd like to see from the other side. And it's a good idea to just volunteer those over. We're going to say to our clients, hey, the other attorney is asking for your most recent credit card statements. They want a copy of your, car loan statement. If you say, well, do I have to give those over? And it's like, well, no, technically you don't, because they haven't issued discovery. And you're like, well, I'm not giving them over. Then what are you doing then, really? You're playing games with the process. You're just prolonging it, and you're inviting them to have to issue full-blown discovery. So the more cooperation we have here, the better.
So, whenever you get all the information together, how does the timing work? Like, if I have it together, do I automatically just hand it over even if the other side isn't ready? Or do you come up with a time and you both do it at the same time? Like, how does it work? And does the timing matter?
The timing does matter, and it's each county has a different deadline for the financial affidavit, or they can go county by county. It's generally 30 days from when you file your appearance, or 30 days from when you file your answer. So there are some deadlines in there. The financial affidavit is the document most commonly that is given extensions of time. But again, if you procrastinate on this and you're constantly asking for extensions of time from the other side or from the court, you're not only losing goodwill, but you're losing the opportunity to make maybe other strategic moves in your case. So it's really one of those things that we want to get buttoned up and complete as soon as possible, so we can start negotiating in earnest. We can possibly file motions. If we're going to issue discovery, we can't do that at all without getting the financial affidavit done. So there's strategic reasons as well as, statutory reasons to get it done quickly.
Now, we mentioned a little bit at the top about temporary motions. Can you explain sort of what those are and why you might need one?
Yeah, so temporary motions are um let's explain a little bit to the listeners about what a motion is.
Okay.
And we hear that term probably on TV a little bit, and we have a general idea. Uh, and the way I describe it is, a motion is a written request for something during a case. And pretty much every request has to be in writing. It's not uncommon if you just go to court and you say, you know what, I want to check out divorce court and just see what happens. I mean, if you want to do that, you can do that. If you live near Chicago, downtown Chicago, the best place to do that is at the Daily Center. You can literally go into the Daily Center, look up a list of the divorce judges, and have a seat. You might find it either boring or quite fascinating, but one of the things that you'll hear judges say often, if someone comes into court and says, Judge, we're looking for X, Y, and Z, or we'd like X, Y, and Z to happen, the judge will say, did you file a motion? And if the person says, no, Judge, we haven't filed a motion, or maybe it's someone representing themselves and they say no, the judge will say, well, then I'm not listening to it. So a motion is that written request that asks for something within the middle of the case. So with that understanding, let's talk about temporary motions. Temporary motions are requests that usually come in this first or this second segment of the case. And the most common requests that we're asking for are to set a parenting time schedule, to set child support or temporary child support, to set temporary maintenance, commonly known as alimony. We may request a contribution to the status quo, or excuse me, to maintain the status quo. And what that means is, my spouse has always been paying the mortgage, so they need to continue paying the mortgage. That's what maintaining the status quo is. And then I think the other motion that is somewhat common, although very difficult to get the judge to say yes to this, is exclusive possession of the house. For whatever reason, you want your spouse to be kicked out of the house, you can ask the judge to do that, but it is not easy to get that done. And judges don't do it just because it's kind of uncomfortable in the house. You have to have some good legal reasons to be able to do that.
Yeah. So what would you say are a few things you should avoid or missteps like during this time? Um, because, you're talking about financial, your financials, you're talking about potentially these temporary orders about who's paying for the mortgage or time with the kids, or maybe even potentially being asked to move out of your house. I mean, it just feels like there's a lot of things that are happening during this time that could potentially be emotionally heated, hurtful, and just it feels like a high pressure time. So what would you say are just some of those high level things that during this moment, even though it's tough, you should try to avoid?
Yeah, we could probably do an entire episode on this. There's probably a couple dozen that we could think of. But I think three good ones to think about during this stage of the case. One of them I already talked about, which was procrastinating on the financial affidavit. That can really put you and your attorney behind the eight ball as far as moving the case forward, negotiating, implementing other strategies, and just being proactive in general. So, as hard as it might be to dive into the weeds of your finances, it's got to get done. So that's number one. The second one is telling your lawyer is going to do a comprehensive interview of what's going on in your situation. And there may be talk of a strategy to file this, 8-count motion to request all of these different things related to what's going on. And the problem I have with that is I think it just muddies the water around what actually you need immediately. It makes negotiation more difficult. Now, this is not a one size fits all thing. There are definitely many different strategies. In certain cases, our office may even file that kitchen sink motion to create some leverage because there is so much going on. But generally, what I like to see is attorneys really thinking strategically around what is absolutely needed to be litigated here and what maybe can we save for the negotiation and settlement table. So that's number two. And then number three is there's a desire that people have, and it comes from anger, resentment, fear, these negative emotions, to air our dirty laundry as soon as possible, to get in front of the judge and to show the judge these nasty text messages the other side is sending, and or these Facebook posts or social media posts. Facebook, I'm dating myself here. The and for the judge to say, to like kind of point and declare that the other side is a bad spouse and they're a bad parent and it's their fault, and for this to be a moment in court where you get validation or something like that, when in reality it doesn't happen like that ever. And for a judge to actually make any declarations takes months and months and months, and it's very anticlimactic. So make sure that you don't fall into that trap of just wanting to air your dirty laundry and get the judge to pronounce the other side as the lesser of you two, because it just won't happen that way. And then you'll fall into kind of this toxic cycle of both of you throwing throwing these negative things back and forth, and it's just not productive. So don't fall into that trap.
Yeah, you probably need to get a counselor, or a good friend to go through some of that with, and because typically a judge is not up for it. You're not going to get the satisfaction from a judge that you're looking for, and in fact, they're probably going to be frustrated with you if you're bringing that type of dirty laundry
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
court.
Yeah, and I've seen it. I mean, I've seen people reprimanded, the ones that thought that they were, the ones that thought that they were on the offense quickly get on the defense, because the judge says to both people, "What are you guys doing here? You have a kid to raise. You should be working together to do that rather than coming into court and pointing fingers back and forth. And this is why we try to keep all cases out of court as much as we can, because it's just not the environment that co-parents really need. It just gets really toxic, and it's an inherently contentious place. Courtrooms are where large corporations sue each other. It's where prosecutors bring cases against violent criminals, and then we use the same exact process to divorce people who were once in love and now need to work together to raise their child. It's inherently a contentious place, and a place to be avoided if we can do it.
Yeah, do not expect to get satisfaction out of the courtroom. That's for sure. Bobby, let's talk a little bit. You mentioned that, and we talk about this a lot, that, you love, to negotiate, out of court, that's always, your first choice. And we were talking a little bit about temporary motions. So why don't we sort of talk through, when would you say is the right time to file a motion versus, could you potentially negotiate that issue and not have to file at all?
Yeah, I think there are certain times when it really does make sense to file the motion. And usually it's the stuff that's pretty cut and dry. It's the child support issue. Maybe you and your spouse have already split, and you are the one that is carrying the burden and the privilege of taking care of your kids the majority of the time, and you're not getting financial help from the other side. That is a cut and dry motion. You file that motion, there's an exchange of financial information, and a judge will set child support. There is that's the most cut and dry. You can file a motion also for temporary maintenance. Maybe you've never been the breadwinner, the other side has, and you're split, and now you're cut off financially. You can file that motion for temporary maintenance. That one is not as cut and dry, but again, it's one I think that can really be necessary because of the urgency of things. I mean, if your spouse is unwilling to negotiate, says, I'm not paying you a dime, and your attorney is saying you have a very good chance of getting this, you're legally entitled to it, then that motion makes sense. Some of this other stuff, filing a motion for exclusive possession of the house when you don't quite have the facts there that would make sense to file it, can just cause more contention. But again, this is not one size fits all, and the fact patterns here can be very nuanced. So don't take what I'm saying as gospel. Like, really, these are decisions that your attorney needs to make, understanding you, your needs, understanding the other side, who the judge is, who the other attorney is. But if at all possible, we want to see if we can negotiate these things out, because the motion process does take a lot longer than people expect it to.
Yeah, and speaking of that, how long realistically does the process take for kind of this second phase, this second step from that, when you're doing the financial affidavits and all of that? Well, what should a client expect?
Yeah, I mean, even for the most cut and dry motion, the child support one, what we're looking at as far as timeline is, like, you are going to file the motion. That's going to take a few days for your law firm to prepare it, get it filed. Then they have to do what's called presentment of that motion. That usually takes about a week to 10 days before they can get into court, because they have to get a court date for that. Once they get into court and present that motion to the judge then gives the other side time to respond to that motion. Usually that's about 28 days or so, and then a hearing date is set. Hopefully you're in a county where the judge has ample time on their calendar, and you can get a date maybe 2 weeks after that. So on the short end, we're looking at 45 days. If you're in a county where things can really drag on, the court's calendar is very full, you could be looking at 90 days before you are in court having a hearing. A judge is entering an order saying child support is going to commence, and then it might not even commence. The first payment might not be until 2 weeks after that. So I'd say on the very short end, from filing the motion to getting that first payment is probably like 2 months. And on the longer end, it could be upwards of about 4 months. So really something to consider when you're deciding what you need to do, what kind of support you need to have before you start this process.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Patience. Got to find a lot of patience through the divorce process because it is not typically speedy. Well, Bobby, I think that wraps us up for today. Thanks so much for all of your insight, per usual. And this is sort of a 3-part series. We'll be back next week where we'll talk about mediation and negotiation and a little bit more about discovery, which we touched on today, but we'll go in a little bit deeper. And if you have any questions about anything we discussed today, please feel free to comment below, reach out, and we'll be happy to answer them on a future episode. Well, Bobby, thanks so much for being here and excited to talk again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast. We hope today's episode gave you clarity and support as you move forward on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Tune in next week for more insights and expert advice on the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.